Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today we're going to take a look at the recently released 2 to 4 player worker placement and set collection game called Trollhalla. In Trollhalla, each player represents a specific troll clan that is taken to the seas in search of islands that hold various resources to plunder and pillage for their own. Thematically, each player belongs to the same troll nation, yet works independently of one another by competing to not only collect the most amounts of plunder from each of the islands, but also to fulfill and sustain various scoring objectives that are awarded to players for collecting the most of the game's 7 plunder tile types. Trollhalla is a medium to lightweight game that can be played in just under an hour, making it a good choice for gamers who are either new to the hobby or just interested in an easier and less combative style of game. Now, there are already a couple of video reviews up within the community, including an official video tutorial of how to play the game that was commissioned by the designer himself, so I will not be explaining the majority of the rules in this video. However, I will spend some time with the basic overall objectives of the game and how players go about taking actions that will ultimately affect the game's outcome. Trollhalla is a very simple game to learn, teach, and play, which is due in part to not only the game's simple to understand mechanics, but also to the very limited amount of component types that are used within the game. First is the game board, which contains 7 islands that will hold either 4 or 5 random plunder tiles as dictated by the number of blank slots on each of these islands, and are drawn from a provided black cloth bag. These 7 unique plunder tile types represent varying amounts of points that players can collect throughout the course of the game, whose values are located on the shields of each player's individual private boat boards. Points are scored at the end of the game for the total number of each specific tile type that is collected, with bonus points being awarded to those players who collect the most of each individual tile type, which is situated at the top of the main game board. At the start of the game, each player will receive and place in front of them all 16 of their double-sided troll tokens in their player color, along with their matching private boat board. The troll tokens will be used to mark individual player actions for their turn, including either sending a troll aboard a ship or sending a troll out to sea in order to scout, while their player board will hold all their accumulated plunder for the entirety of the game. Then the 3 provided troll ships will be placed upon the game board on any 3 islands that are not directly adjacent to one another and are also not the center island, making sure that each of the 3 ships' prows are facing to the board's western edge. Each of these 3 ships is color-coded and will move around the game board only when deemed to do so by die rolls that are done with the correlating color-coded special die. Each ship has 4 available slots, or seats on them, where players can use their available actions to place their troll tokens upon them in preparation for the ship's movement to a nearby island of which they can plunder. Which island the ship moves to is determined in part by the shipping lanes that originate from the source island from where the boat is located, and whether or not they are open and available to be plundered, as well as being dictated by the sea lane that contains the most troll scouts upon it. Between each of these islands are weather symbols, which mark the game's 3 different weather patterns, being wind, sun, or storm. When players choose to utilize an action to scout upon one of these locations, they will collect 1 card showing the matching symbol of the space that they just marked. Players will use these cards in matching pairs throughout the game to call upon the weather gods by enacting their special ability in which they enable. Finally, there are 16 Chief Troll tokens, which are black and are initially placed off to the corner of the game board. Chief Troll tokens will serve 2 main purposes in the game, both of which primarily speed up the game's pace and block future troll placement actions from occurring on the game board. Before the game begins, the plunder tiles will be mixed into the game bag and placed at random on each of the empty spaces of the game board, moving from west to east on each of the 4 remaining uncovered islands. As I previously mentioned, Trollhalla is a very quick playing game where players will take turns in order by placing their trolls at various locations on the game board, with trolls that are being placed on ships having the ability to claim plunder from nearby islands when that ship sails, and trolls that are placed in the sea having the distinct ability to determine where the ships eventually sail to. As easy as that sounds, the twist comes in players' ability to determine how best to balance each of these two actions, and disregarding one action for another will often leave players with very little influence on which tiles they can attempt to accumulate en masse during their turns, or during other players' turns. A player's turn has 3 total phases, 2 of which are required and 1 that is completely optional to the player to take, and they work something like this. At the start of a player's turn, they must place 2 of their colored troll tokens onto the game board, and as I previously mentioned, trolls can be placed into very specific types of locations, those being on a ship and those being in a sea space. Players, however, are not allowed to place 2 of their trolls next to one another on the same ship, or on top of one another on the same sea space. Placing their trolls on ships gives players the only real opportunity to collect plunder in the game, and will move from one island to another once that ship is completely full with 4 total trolls. But placing their trolls on sea spaces gives them the added advantage of determining which island those ships might sail to, and in turn which tokens they might be able to collect from those islands. Placing in sea spaces also allows players to collect weather cards, which can be played in pairs during the optional second phase of their turn to enact their special abilities, such as flipping a ship from one direction to another, removing entire stacks of trolls in a sea space, or taking 1 extra placement action during their turn, all of which can become very powerful abilities when timed correctly within the game. The third and final action requires the active player to roll the die, with the color on the die indicating which ship the player must now activate. There are a couple things that are going to happen. First, if the required ship is not full of troll tokens at that point, then the player will simply place 1 black chief troll token onto that ship, and play will pass to the next player in turn order. If the ship is full of troll tokens, then the ship will set sail to one of the islands that are connected to it via the available sea lanes. A couple things again will happen at this point to determine which island the ship will sail to. First, players will examine all the possible sea lanes that are adjacent to that active ship that's moving, considering only the possible islands that are not blocked by other ships. Next, the players will check which of the sea lanes has the most troll scouts located upon them. If more than 1 sea lane ties for the most troll scout tokens, then the ship will simply get confused and not move during this turn, in which case the active player must then take another one of the chief troll tokens from the supply and place it on top of one of those tied sea spaces for the most tokens, ending their turn immediately and then again passing on to the next available player. However, if 1 sea lane does meet this criteria by having the most troll tokens allocated to it, and its island destination is not blocked by another ship, then the ship will set sail along that path to the appropriate island. When the ship does move, it clears out the sea lane of all the available troll scouts that were located on its path, sending them back to the ship markers that are located below the chief ship on the left side of the game border, in the order in which they were stacked. Now, without going into too much detail, the chief ship is essentially another way to collect extra plunder tiles through the course of the game, but it cannot be relied on solely for the purposes of winning, since its mechanic only allows players to acquire 1 plunder tile when the spaces are full of troll tokens, and only if there are actual tiles available from the chief's plunder, which essentially only happens when the ships are filled with chief tokens and not with players' own troll tokens. Now, that may sound a little complicated, but it's very easy to understand and is better explained in the rulebook as well as in the official video tutorial that is now out. Moving forward, once the ship actually arrives at the new island, players' troll tokens will disembark from the ship and collect their plunder from the island in the exact same order that they are originally arranged on that ship, proceeding from the front of the ship to the back of the ship. Now, this is why it can become very important at specific times in the game for players to essentially flip the ships with the win card special ability, allowing them to collect tiles that were not originally lined up with their needs. Plunder is then placed on the appropriate spots of each player's private boat boards and are accumulated in that way, while the trolls that were used to collect those plunder are returned to the player's supply so they can be used on future turns. Finally, the new island will now be occupied by that ship, with the old island in which it sailed from to be refilled with random plunder from the bag. with play passing on in clockwise order again to the next available player. The game will end when there are not enough plunder tiles from the bag to refill an island from which the active player just sailed from. Now this is definitely one of my shorter reviews, and I didn't go into all the rules, but I have given you a basic understanding of the game's overall mechanics and structure, which should be just enough to help you decide if this is the right game for you. As I previously mentioned, Trollhalla is a very simple game to learn and to teach, making it a good choice for a variety of different gamers out there, most notably of which is my wife, of all people, who is simply addicted to this game's short play length and its minimal amount of downtime. To some, though, the game may feel a little too light for their taste, especially since at its heart it's little more than a simple set collection game with a touch of worker placement added in. But after repeated playthroughs, the game's many nuances begin to open up more by revealing a surprising amount of depth that is not initially suggested in the rules. Being that every player must play 2 troll tokens on their turn creates a quickened pace to the game, which makes every placement incredibly important to the players, and the inability to always accurately predict a ship's path makes players concentrate more on maximizing their gains than just haphazardly choosing random troll placements across the game board. Players must also always be cognizant of other players' weather cards and Troll Sea Scout placements so they can properly counteract those events on their own turn should things go horribly wrong for them during a round of play. Even with all of this, though, a small amount of luck is still found within the game through the use of the die rolls, but thankfully it affects all players fairly equally, but it can at times rear its ugly head by making some of your best laid plans go to complete waste. Therefore, players again should always spend their turns maximizing their 2 available actions, knowing that these types of situations could change quite drastically by the time that the turn order comes back around to them. Now, for gamers who enjoy having a large amount of influence and control in their games, they're going to have some initial concerns and adjustments to make with their initial playthroughs of Trollhalla, since there's always going to be a random element added in on each player's turn through the use of the die, so you're never quite sure when a ship is going to sail. Because of this, and the use of some timely played weather cards, there is a tendency for a large amount of screwage in the game, which may or not be everyone's cup of tea. And in our experiences with the game thus far, the more players that participate, the less amount of real control that they each will have. Therefore, for my wife, it's best played as a 2-player game, and I would probably agree with that sentiment. In the end, though, it's all about what you enjoy in a game, and Trollhalla is definitely a game that requires numerous playthroughs to best understand that there is a lot more going on here than what one initially sees. It's extremely quick to play, has very little to no downtime, and is both intuitive and very, very smooth, making it one of the better medium-light games to be released in the early months of 2011. So that is Trollhalla. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching.